What is up, y'all? My name is Rhino Spartan, and I found a way to make walkers in Space Engineers without scripts, timer blocks, or even event controllers. A while back, I set out to find a new way to create walkers in Space Engineers, and I have finally devised a mechanism that works exactly how I wanted it to. Now you're probably wondering, if there are no scripts or timer blocks, what is making it move? Well, allow me to show y'all what lies inside this red box. That's right. Instead of employing scripts or programming, I decided to harness the rotational force of wheels to drive the walking mechanism. I drew heavy inspiration from the strand-beast linkage mechanism designed by Dutch artist Theo Jansen. The strand beast uses pivot points that are positioned in such a way that when rotational force is applied toward the center, a walking motion is generated. Similarly, throughout the linkage system, there are pivot points that rotate when these wheels move. Each individual leg is comprised of 3 pivot points. There is one at the top to maintain the leg's position, one in the middle, and one connected to the wheel. When the wheel rotates, the leg is propelled forward to cover distance and lifted up to take another step. As shown before, the legs move in pairs. The movements of legs opposite each other on the diagonal correspond, meaning they move at the same time in an identical way. The pivot points connected to the wheels on both the front right and back left legs are always the same distance from each other and are connected via this connection structure. The movements of legs opposite each other on the sides are always opposite each other, so they alternate also. The wheels on adjoining sides are linked by this beam here. No, your eyes do not deceive you. You did in fact see the connection structure phase through the part that connects the wheels to the rest of the walker. This is accomplished through a little trick called the Rotor Sandwich. The rotor part that connects to a rotor lacks collision properties on the gray part of the block. This is what allows rotor parts to actually attach to rotors properly. As a result, characters and blocks can phase through this piece of the rotor part. Now you see me, now you don't. Now you see me, and now you don't. You get the idea. With this in mind, you can place thin blocks in between the piece where the rotor part has collision and the actual rotor itself, hence the name given, the Rotor Sandwich. Observe. This system also does not instigate clang if built properly, having the rotor displacement set to the maximum. Whoa, hey! Is that a clang drive? The result of applying all these mechanisms is this steady, consistent proof of concept linkage system. There are also several upsides that come with using wheels instead of timers or scripts. Firstly, and the main reason I opted for them instead, is that they move based off of player movement inputs. Since this is the case, this walker can also walk backwards. Indeed, this walker has a reverse feature. Secondly, rotation limits on the joints don't have to be changed, nor is there any programming required. And finally, because the pivot points aren't doing any work, they can be ground down to greatly reduce the PCU cost of the whole system while still maintaining the same functionality. Since this walker contains many moving components, I'm going to provide a tutorial on how to build it. To start, we're going to build a stand for the walker to offset it from the ground. I am going to color all the blocks that will be removed during the tutorial in red. Okay, place a landing gear on a static plane level with gravity. Then, place a 10 block column on top of it. You can now begin work on the main structure. Create a column of 5 blocks, a line of 11 blocks on top of it, and a column of 5 blocks beneath the end of that line. To more easily remember which side is which, add letter symbols L and R to the center of each side to signify what side of the walker it is. Below these symbols, add blast door blocks to both sides of the center block as shown. These are for the rotors that will attach to the connection structure. Next, add a line of 3 armor panels on both ends for the rotor sandwich to be built in a later step. The panels in the front should be set to the right and the ones in the back to the left. Now, add a block at the end of both armor panel lines. Set up a symmetry system that runs through the center of the structure. This will be used for a variety of things in later steps, but first, use it to place 2 lines of 4 blocks on both sides as shown. Now you can add the 3x3 wheel suspensions. Using symmetry mode, place the right side wheels on the right side, and the left side wheels will be placed on the opposite face like so. And paint them a different color because the gray's kind of ugly. Add a battery and control seat to the top of the structure. To more easily differentiate the wheel suspensions, name them according to which end they are on. Now, before changing any wheel settings, turn the use for parking off in the landing gear settings. Group the wheel suspensions to change their settings. Set the steering angle to 0 degrees because no steering is needed. Set the power to 100% because a lot of power is needed to generate motion. Set the strength to 100% so that the wheel maintains its position. Set the height offset to 0 to center the wheels. Bring the friction all the way to 0 so that there is no resistance between the wheels and the rest of the system. And finally, set the speed to 20 kilometers per hour. With that done, save the block group. We are now going to build the connection structure for the alternating system. Place a line of 3 blocks to support the structure in the interim. Using symmetry mode, create a line of 9 blocks. Now, place a blast door edge on the end, making the total length of the line 11 blocks. You'll now want to turn off symmetry mode. On the right side of the walker, create a line 8 blocks long that ends at the edge of the right front wheel. On the left, place another line, only this time going towards the back. Following this, draw up columns 5 blocks tall on both sides as shown. Activate symmetry mode and position the gyroscopes for maneuvering beneath the control seat. Go ahead and make a new block group with these gyroscopes. Place 2 more gyroscopes in the orientation shown. Select these 2 gyroscopes and save them as a different block group. Set the pitch override to 60 RPM and the power to 25%. To more easily distinguish the override gyroscopes, name them according to which side they are on. If you built everything correctly so far, you just finished Stage 1. Congratulations. What we're going to do now is configure the alternating system. Place your first rotor on the blast door on the left side. Rename it to Rotor Middle Left Center Pivot. Enable its inertia tensor and lock its position. Set its torque to 0 and its displacement to minus 9.6 centimeters. Following this, create a line of blocks with a rotor on the end of it. Place down another block on the column. Open the control panel and rename the rotor to Rotor Middle Left Outer Pivot. Don't enable the inertia tensor or lock just yet, but do set the torque to 0 and raise the displacement to the maximum. Get rid of the rotor part on the rotor and place a new one on the blast door. Reopen the control panel and click the Attach button. If it attached properly, turn on the inertia tensor and rotor lock. We're now going to conduct similar steps for the right side. Place down a rotor on the blast door block and rename it to Rotor Middle Right Center Pivot. Enable its inertia tensor and lock, disable the torque, and set the displacement to minus 9.6. Create another line with a rotor on the end. Place a blast door on top of the column. Rename the rotor to Rotor Middle Right Outer Pivot. Bring its displacement all the way up and remove the rotor part. Place a new one and attach it. When you've attached it, enable the inertia tensor and lock and set the torque to 0. After all that, you've now connected the structure to the middle. We're now going to build the front right and back left legs. Start by placing 2 rotors, one on the front right and one on the back left. Name these Rotor Front Right Top Pivot and Rotor Back Left Top Pivot respectively. Enable their inertia tensors and rotor locks, set their torques to 0, and their displacements to the max. Build pillars 4 blocks tall on each rotor and place hinges at the bottom of them. Name them Hinge Front Right Middle Pivot and Hinge Back Left Middle Pivot. After naming them, leave their inertia tensors off, but enable the lock and set the torque to 0. After adjusting the hinge settings, place lines on both hinges 6 blocks long. On the ends of these lines, place down rotors and name them Rotor Front Right Wheel Pivot and Rotor Back Left Wheel Pivot. Now that those rotors have been placed, you can now add rotors to the connection structure. Add them to the ends and rename them to Rotor Front Right Alternate and Rotor Back Left Alternate. Turn on their tensors and locks, set their torques to 0, and maximize their displacements. On these rotors, create structures with magnetic plates to attach to the wheels in the way shown. Upon placing the magnetic plates, disable the Used for Parking option and remove them from the terminal to keep it organized. You can now attach the front right wheel pivot rotor to the alternating system rotor in the way shown before. Once you've done this, unlock all the pivot points except for Hinge Back Left Middle Pivot, Rotor Back Left Top Pivot, and Rotor Back Left Wheel Pivot. Remove the support keeping the connection structure in place. Release the brake and rotate the mechanism around until the back left wheel pivot rotor is positioned right next to the alternating system rotor. When it is, set the brake again and lock all the pivot points again. You can now attach the rotors together. If everything is configured correctly, the system should behave as shown when everything is unlocked. If you made it this far, nice work. That was the hardest stage. We can now get to work on the rotor sandwich and the other two legs. First, return the system back to its position. When you've done this, build the front left leg just as you did the others. After you finish the leg, build the link structure that you built before. Build a line of 3 blast door blocks and place a rotor on the end of it. Rename the rotor to Rotor Sandwich Front. Enable both the inertia tensor and lock, but leave the torque where it is because this rotor ain't a pivot point. Set the displacement to the max. Now create another line 2 blocks long and build another wheel link structure. After all that, you can now place the magnetic plates and remove their use for parking signal. With that, we can now work on the final leg. Unlock all the pivot points and orient the system to where the back left wheel pivot is positioned to the other side. When everything is in position, you can now build the back right leg. Next, we're going to do the same thing we did to make the rotor sandwich structure in the front of the walker. After everything has been connected, group the middle pivot point rotors, the hinges, and the rest of the rotors for ease of access. Build block columns 8 blocks tall on the bottom of each wheel pivot rotor. For the feet, place short 2x2 wheel suspensions on the bottom of the columns as shown. And it doesn't matter if you use either the right or left side wheel suspensions. But if you are organized, like myself, you can place the right side wheel suspensions on the right side of the walker and the left side suspensions on the left. Group the short suspensions and set both the steering angle and power to 0. Set the strength to 15%. Leave the height offset where it is. Set the friction to 20%. And the speed limit to, well, 0 because the feet aren't supposed to be driving away. Go ahead and name and save the block group. After you've done all this, remove the column offsetting the walker from the ground. And finally, set up actions to easily lock and unlock the various pivot point groups. If you built everything correctly, you will now have a new walker that you can customize and personalize to your heart's content. If y'all have any questions or suggestions concerning this walking machine, please leave a comment down below. Y'all's feedback is very much appreciated. I know that I've been absent for a long time, but I think I'm here to stay. You can expect much more frequent uploads in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.